The police car pulled up to the baseball field just as I finished drilling the last group of recruits through a tactical scenario. 3 officers got out, hands on their belts, and I knew immediately something had gone very wrong. They didn't look like they were there to watch practice. One of them pointed at me, Ashley Martinez, 42 years old, standing on the infield dirt in my FBI training gear, and started walking over. I remember thinking how surreal it felt, how the afternoon sun was still warm on my face, how the recruits behind me had gone completely silent. By the time the lead officer reached me, I already understood. Someone had called in a complaint about a black woman at the field with a group of people. Someone had seen me directing armed individuals through exercises and thought the worst. Within 3 minutes, I was in handcuffs, being read my rights, while the very federal agents I'd spent the last 8 years training watched from the sidelines, stunned. But that's where this story really starts, not with the arrest, but with everything that came before. Everything that made me the woman standing on that baseball field in the first place. My life before that moment was quiet in the way that only comes from hard work and genuine satisfaction. I'd been married to Michael for 15 years, and while we'd had our rough patches, what marriage doesn't, we'd built something solid. We had a house in the suburbs of Maryland, a 3-bedroom colonial with a wraparound porch that Michael insisted on painting every other spring. The mortgage was reasonable, the neighborhood was safe, and I'd finally paid off my car in full 2 years ago. Every morning, I'd wake up at 5:30, make coffee in the kitchen while Michael slept, and spend 30 minutes on the treadmill in the basement before the day demanded anything else. It was routine, but it was mine. It grounded me. I'd been with the FBI for 17 years by that point, but the last 8 had been something special. I'd moved into the training division after my knees started protesting the fieldwork, and I discovered I had a gift for teaching. There was something about watching a nervous recruit, fresh out of the academy, terrified of making a mistake, grow into a confident agent that fed my soul in ways that chasing suspects never could. I worked with the tactical teams, taught crisis de-escalation, led scenario-based training that prepared people for the worst moments of their professional lives. I was good at it, more than good. My trainees had the lowest complaint rates in the district, and my methods had been adopted by 3 other field offices. People asked me for recommendations. People wanted to work with me. Michael supported it, or at least he said he did. "That's my wife," he'd say to his friends at barbecues, squeezing my shoulder. "Training the next generation of crime fighters." But looking back now, I can see the small things I missed. The way he'd ask more frequently where I was going, who I'd be with, what time I'd be back. The way he started taking an interest in my schedule, asking to see my calendar. It seemed like normal husband stuff, caring about his wife, wanting to know where she'd be. Or at least, that's what I told myself when something inside me whispered that it felt different, that it felt controlling. Home life was good, though. We'd renovated the kitchen 3 years ago. White subway tiles, stainless steel appliances, a big island where we'd have coffee together on weekend mornings. I remember the way Michael would stand there in his pajamas, scrolling through his phone, and I'd feel this small burst of contentment. This was the life I'd worked for. This was security. This was love. We'd stopped trying to have kids after the second miscarriage, and while it hurt, we'd made peace with it. We had each other. That felt like enough. Michael worked in commercial real estate. He was good at it, made decent money, not rich, but enough that we lived comfortably. He wore suits to work, drove a BMW that he'd bought used but kept immaculate, and he was the kind of guy people liked immediately. Charming, attentive when he wanted to be. His mother, Karen, lived about 20 minutes away, and we'd have her over for dinner about once a month. She was the type of woman who always had opinions. About my job. "Isn't that dangerous, honey?" About my hair. "Have you thought about relaxing it more?" About whether we should have tried harder for children. "You're not getting any younger, you know." Michael would usually laugh off her comments, but sometimes I'd catch him nodding slightly, as if she'd confirmed something he'd been thinking. Things started shifting in small ways that summer. Nothing dramatic. Nothing you could point to and say, "There, that's the moment." It was more like a slow drift, the kind where you don't realize you're moving until you look back and see how far you've gone. Michael started asking more detailed questions about the people I worked with. Not in a curious way, but in a specific way. He wanted to know names, positions, what I'd observed about their personal lives. I thought he was just interested in my world. I thought it was sweet that he wanted to know about my day. One evening in July, I came home from a training session at 7 o'clock. Michael was already there, which was unusual. He normally worked late. He was sitting in the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee already made, like he was waiting for me. When I walked in, he looked up with a smile that seemed rehearsed. "Hey, babe," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Sit down. I want to talk to you about something." I remember sitting down slowly, immediately feeling that flutter in my stomach that means something is not right. My hands were still cold from the air conditioning in the car, and I wrapped them around the warm coffee mug. "What's going on?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Nothing bad," he said quickly. I've been thinking about something, about your work, about the people you train." I waited. In my training, we teach people that silence is a tool. Let the other person fill it. So I did. "Some of the guys from my office have been talking about getting into security work," he continued. "Private consulting. It's a growing field and the money is good. Really good. I was thinking, with your connections, your knowledge, maybe you could help me break into that world." It was an innocent request, a husband asking his wife for a professional connection. But something about the way he asked it, the way he'd set up this conversation like he'd been planning it, made my skin prickle. "What kind of security work?" I asked. "Just corporate stuff. Consulting on security protocols, that kind of thing. Boring, really. But lucrative." He smiled again, and this time it reached his eyes. "I just thought maybe you could introduce me to some people. Get the ball rolling." "Maybe," I said. "Let me think about it. Some of the people I work with have strict guidelines about who they talk to." "Of course," he said, but I noticed he didn't drop it. Over the next few weeks, he'd bring it up again. "Any thoughts on those introductions? Or, have you had a chance to talk to anyone about that consulting thing?" Each time I'd deflect. Each time something inside me grew more uncomfortable. Then came the day in mid-August when I found his laptop open on the couch. He was in the shower, and I wasn't snooping. I was just moving it to the side table so I could sit down. But the screen lit up, and I saw it. An email. To someone I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Information on FBI training protocols and personnel. Package assembled." My hands went numb. I didn't open it. I couldn't. But I read enough of the preview text to understand that Michael had compiled something. A file. Information. And he was selling it. I closed the laptop gently, as if the action itself were dangerous. I sat on the couch for a long time, not moving, not thinking, just existing in that strange space where your world hasn't quite finished collapsing yet. The shower upstairs was still running. Michael was singing, actually singing, some song from the radio, and I was sitting in our beautiful kitchen with the white subway tiles and the stainless steel appliances, realizing that the man I'd loved for 15 years was committing a federal crime. And worse, he was doing it with information I'd given him. I sat in the parking lot of the federal building for 20 minutes before I had the courage to walk inside. My hands were steady now. That was the worst part. The shaking had stopped somewhere around 3 in the morning, replaced by something colder, something more dangerous. Ice water in my veins. I had the laptop, the emails, the bank statements, and most importantly, I had copies of everything already uploaded to a secure cloud server that Michael didn't know about. I'd learned that lesson well enough. The FBI's Internal Affairs office was on the 4th floor. I took the elevator alone, watching my reflection in the polished doors. I barely recognized myself. Same face, same uniform, different person entirely. When the doors opened, I stepped out and walked toward the office with the kind of purpose that comes from having nothing left to lose. Special Agent Thomas Chen was waiting for me. I'd called ahead, used my clearance, made it clear this was urgent and personal. He stood when I entered his office, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. The office was generic, gray walls, filing cabinets, the hum of fluorescent lights. A place where careers died. "Agent Martinez," he said carefully, settling back into his chair. "You said this was about a leak." "It's about my husband," I said, placing the laptop on his desk. "He's been selling classified information about our training protocols and personnel details to someone. I don't know who yet, but I have proof of at least 3 separate transactions over the last 4 months. Chen's expression didn't change, but his hand moved toward the laptop. Tell me everything. I did. I told him about the email I'd found, about the pattern of questions, about the way Michael had pushed for introductions. I showed him the documents I'd printed, the bank transfers, the encrypted emails, the timeline. As I talked, I watched something shift in Chen's face. Not surprise. Disappointment. The look of a man who'd seen this before. We're going to need your full cooperation, he said finally. This is going to be complicated. He's your spouse, which means… I know what it means, I interrupted. It means I'm going to be questioned about what I knew and when. It means my career might be over anyway, just for being married to him. I don't care. I want him prosecuted. Chen nodded slowly. That's not how this usually goes. Usually in these situations, the spouse tries to protect. I'm not usual, I said, and I'm not protecting anyone anymore. What happened next moved with the relentless machinery of federal law enforcement. Within hours, the FBI had seized Michael's laptop and phone. They brought him in for questioning that afternoon. He called me from the holding area, his voice confused and then angry. What the hell did you do? He demanded. Why are they asking me about emails? Ashley, what did you tell them? I hung up without answering. The next 72 hours were a blur of interviews with internal affairs, with the Criminal Investigation Division, with lawyers from the Bureau. They wanted to know everything, every conversation, every trip, every time Michael had asked about my work. They asked me if I'd known. They asked me if I'd helped. They asked me if I'd reported it sooner. The implication beneath every question was the same. How much of this was your fault? By the third day, I was sitting in my lawyer's office. I'd hired my own counsel, separate from any FBI representation, when she handed me a document. Your husband has accepted a plea deal, Linda Hartwell said, sliding a folder across her desk. Linda was sharp, expensive, and she'd handled 3 other cases involving federal employees and their spouses. 20 months in federal prison, restitution of $340,000, permanent revocation of security clearance, and full cooperation with the investigation into his contacts. I read the document twice. Somewhere in that statement was the collapse of my marriage, the end of the life I'd built, the dissolution of every assumption I'd made about trust and safety. But what I felt wasn't sadness. It was relief. What about my career? I asked. You're in the clear, Linda said. The Bureau's preliminary finding is that you reported the breach immediately upon discovery and cooperated fully. The timing of your discovery, finding that email when you did, actually helps you. If you'd known for weeks and said nothing, that would be different. But you didn't. You acted. I nodded. When does he go in? 3 weeks, after sentencing. 3 weeks. I had 3 weeks to dismantle the life I'd built with Michael, to separate finances, to figure out where I was going to live. Our house would be sold, we'd agreed to that. I'd take enough to put a down payment on something small, something that was only mine. Everything else would go to restitution and legal fees. When I left Linda's office, I drove to the baseball field where I trained my recruits. It was a Saturday afternoon, and nobody was there. I walked out to the pitcher's mound and stood alone in the middle of the diamond, looking out at the empty bleachers. This was where it had happened. This was where the FBI had come for me, where I'd been humiliated in front of the people I'd trained, where my credibility had been questioned by officers who didn't understand that I was the victim here, not the perpetrator. But I was standing here now, and I was still standing. That had to count for something. The sentencing hearing was on a Tuesday in October. Michael appeared via video from the holding facility. He was being kept there pending transfer to the federal prison in Allenwood, Pennsylvania. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. His expensive suit was gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit. His mother sat behind me in the courtroom, her face rigid. She hadn't spoken to me since the arrest. The prosecutor laid out the case. The deliberate theft of classified material, the sale of that material to a foreign intermediary, it was Russian, as I'd suspected, the betrayal of federal trust. Michael's lawyer argued for leniency, his first offense, his cooperation, the stress of financial difficulties that had motivated the crime. As if that mattered. As if the reason you commit treason somehow made it less treasonous. When the judge asked if Michael wanted to address the court, he turned to look directly at the camera, directly at me. "I made a mistake," he said, his voice hollow. "I thought I was being smart. I thought I could provide for my family, make sure we had security. I didn't think about what it meant. I didn't think about anything except the money." He paused, and I saw something in his eyes, a flash of the man I'd married, the charming real estate agent who'd brought me flowers on our first date. But it was buried under something else now. Desperation. Weakness. "I'm sorry," he continued. "To my wife especially. I betrayed her trust in the worst possible way." The judge sentenced him to 20 months. When the gavel came down, the sound echoed through the courtroom like a period at the end of a sentence. Michael's expression didn't change. He'd known what was coming. As the marshals led him away, Karen turned to look at me. Her face was a storm of rage and something else, something that looked like shame. She didn't speak. She just gathered her purse and left. I stayed in my seat until everyone had filed out. Then I stood, straightened my jacket, and walked out of that courtroom into the October afternoon. The sky was clear and blue. The leaves were turning gold. The world had kept spinning without Michael in it, and I was still here. 6 months later, I was living in a small townhouse in Arlington. It had 2 bedrooms and a bathroom that wasn't much bigger than a closet, but it was mine. Every payment went to my name only. The mortgage company knew my credit score. It had taken a hit from the legal fees and the separation, but it was rebuilding. I'd learned how to be alone in a house and not feel the absence of someone else. I'd learned how to make coffee in the morning without remembering how Michael used to bring me the first cup while I was still in bed. The FBI had cleared me completely. My methods in the training division had been examined and found to be secure. My judgment in reporting the breach immediately had been praised. I'd been offered a promotion to oversee training protocols across 3 field offices. I'd accepted it. On a Thursday evening in April, I was sitting on my small patio with a glass of wine when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me. "Ashley?" The voice was unfamiliar but formal. "This is Karen Martinez, Michael's mother." I almost hung up. Instead, I waited. "I wanted to tell you something," she continued, and I could hear the difficulty in her voice, the way each word seemed to cost her. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to believe it. I kept telling myself that Michael would never, that he was too smart to do something so stupid, but I knew, and I said nothing. "Karen," I started, but she cut me off. "Let me finish. I came to apologize, not to make excuses, just to say that you were right to turn him in. You were right, and I was wrong. And I'm ashamed of how I treated you after." The line went quiet. I could hear her breathing on the other end, waiting for a response. "I appreciate that," I said finally. "But I did it for me, not for you. I did it because it was the right thing, and because I couldn't stay married to someone who'd done what he did." "I know," Karen said softly. "That's why I'm calling. That's what made me realize what I needed to do." After we hung up, I sat on my patio for a long time, watching the sun set over Arlington. The wine had gone warm in my glass, but I drank it anyway. Michael was in his cell in Allenwood, counting down the days. Karen was counting the cost of her complicity. And I was sitting on my own patio, in my own house, with a job I loved and a future that was entirely my own making. I thought about the baseball field, about the moment the police arrived and the recruits' faces when they realized who the woman in handcuffs was. I thought about how that moment had broken something open inside me, not my spirit, but the illusion that I could trust someone else to be honest with me. The illusion that love meant safety. But I'd rebuilt. I'd chosen to stand, to speak, to act. And now I was standing on the other side of it, looking back at the rubble of my old life with something that wasn't quite peace, but was close enough. It was clarity. It was strength. It was the knowledge that I could survive anything that came next, because I'd already survived this. The wine glass caught the last light of the day, gleaming gold. I raised it slightly, a silent toast to the woman I'd become. Not the woman Michael had tried to use, Not the woman who'd stood handcuffed on a baseball field, humiliated and confused. But the woman who'd looked at her broken world and decided to build something better. I'd thought my life was secure before. I'd been wrong. But I was learning that real security doesn't come from someone else. It comes from yourself. And that was something no one could ever take away from me again.